Last time we met, which was several weeks ago, we talked about funding of commercialization through the different stages of commercialization through the research cycle and so forth. When we talked about it, we talked about the fact that there's several outcomes. One is you can license the IP you generate to someone else, either an industry existing company, someone else who's starting up a company, or you can spin out your own company. And so today, I wanted to talk and give you everything you want to know about spinouts. And this is being recorded, just so everybody knows, and it should be available afterwards if anybody else wants to watch it. So part of making sure this is everything you ever want to know is making it interactive. So as much as people want to ask questions, that would be terrific. Let's make sure we cover everything. We're covering in, I'll say, less than an hour, everything that would normally be covered in quite a few classes to try to go into much more detail. So it's going to be fairly high level, and I'm happy to dive down in any area that you'd like me to. So what I'm going to cover, when to start a company, what is a company? Sometimes it's good to understand exactly what you're trying to accomplish. Your roles, that's probably the most often discussed thing that I've had when I've talked to researchers about spinouts, is how they fit into it. And the reward. Obviously, there is an opportunity for reward if things go well. And I'm going to cover some of the actual numbers and math around what that might look like for you. So before I jump into details, I wanted to talk about why this doesn't happen as much as it might. I was working at the university with researchers for about 1.5 years and had a chance to talk to a huge number of them. And this is actual data that came from those discussions. This is pretty much in priority order about why people are a little bit nervous about starting a company. My intent through this presentation is to talk about this, not to make these issues go away, but just definitely to give you enough information so that you understand this is fairly normal in terms of the type of fears that you might have. But I will also tell you that these are exact same fears you probably have if you decided to have kids or get married or so forth, because it's a big decision with a lot of ramifications depending how it goes. So anyway, top issues are fear of failure. Someone's going to steal my idea and I'm going to have put all this time into it and I'll lose. I don't know what I'm doing. It's a lot of work, and I need to quit my day job. So those are all very reasonable type of issues. I don't know if anybody here has other issues. I definitely, as I said, I'd like to make this as interactive as possible. If anybody has any other fears that you've been harboring, I'd be happy to incorporate those as I go through this as well. So let's talk about starting a company. Last time I talked about the fact that there's a whole continuum of things as you start to go through the commercialization process. Starting a company is actually a very mechanical thing to do. It can be done quickly. It's not that expensive in general, but it is a step in a process. And typically people don't start companies until they've already got an idea, they've validated that there's a need for that idea, and they've flushed out enough of the business model to make sure that it's worth the downside of continuing forward and actually starting a company. And I'll talk briefly about those downsides. Afterwards, when the company started, is where the real work begins from a business perspective. We already talked about all these. I don't think I necessarily need to go through those. But key is there is a point in time where it makes sense to start a business, and it's usually driven around some of the constraints and benefits that you have, and I'll dive into that shortly. What is a business? It's always good to start by knowing what it means when you start a company. A company is a legal entity formed by one or more individuals to engage and operate in a commercial capacity. And there's really a few things here that are important to understand. One is it is a legal entity. And what that means, like having a child, you are forming something that legally exists. It has a mission, it has objectives, it has bank accounts, it has the ability to enter into contracts, it has the right to sue, it had the right to be sued, it can borrow money, it pays taxes, it can own assets. So I mean, really, when people form companies, they are creating something that exists, and it has to be sustained, just as if you were creating anything else. It's also created by people, one or more individuals. Lots and lots of companies are started by a single person. More companies in the research arena, and I'm going to make sure that we stay focused on that, are started by multiple people working together. And the whole concept of commercial capacity is that you are in business for some commercial reason. You're trying to ultimately make money. Even nonprofit companies need to make money. They don't stay nonprofits long if they haven't figured out how to turn what they do into a means of getting money. So let's start with why you should not start a business. It costs money. I think I mentioned earlier, it's not a lot of money. You literally can go and spend $100, $200 and form a company in Delaware. But there's a lot of costs that come with and anxieties and stuff that come with just having a company, because there's compliance issues and there's annual reports, and you have to pay fees annually associated with companies. Depending on the type of company that you form, you have to maintain records, you have to have a group of people who are legally responsible for what the company does. You have to hold shareholders meetings. So there's sort of this overhead compliance you have to deal with. And then another reason not to start a business is you have to shut it down if it doesn't work out. And if you can avoid it, shutting down a business is not as easy as starting up a business. These are really good reasons to make sure you pick your timing correctly. Why should you start a business? So you want to start a business when you have an idea that you want to put momentum behind it. And momentum really does encompass a lot of different things. One is you want to get funding. Obviously, to get funding, people don't want to hand over money to an individual. They want to hand it over to a business. Typically, they hand money over because they get some ownership in it. And another thing a company allows you to do is to split up ownership between founders. And we're going to talk a lot more about ownership and splitting up business and so forth. Very important is it allows you to protect your personal assets. What a number of people don't understand when they get into business is that if there's a problem, if they get sued and they don't have a company to be sued, they will be sued as individuals, and they have the potential to lose all their personal assets. And so a lot of times companies are formed so that you can protect your personal assets and at least create one more level of protection for what's important to you. It allows you to hire people. You can hire as an individual. It can, again, have all sorts of liability issues if you do that. People get in all sorts of problems if they hire people directly and they don't follow various compliance requirements. Again, as a company, if the company hires, it starts to build a veil of protection for you personally. It allows you to sign agreements. Again, when you borrow money, when you go out and start forming manufacturing arrangements, when you start retaining consultants and so forth, these are all agreements that have to be signed. And rather than signing those personally, now you have a company which is building a purpose that is able to sign those. And then finally, it allows you to build brand when you start a business. Are there any questions about why you should or should not start a company?
Just a quick question, but in case there is a sue, for example, so it is possible that this is going to affect also your personal assets, or it depends on the type of company that you are building?
It does depend on what type of company you build. We'll talk shortly about types of companies, and if you are a sole proprietor, there's virtually no protection. If you're a corporation, then they have to sue the company. That doesn't mean they can't sue individuals. Anyone can sue anybody that they want to, but if the company is the one that owns the agreements and has the money and is dispensing and so forth, it is the entity that ultimately is responsible. And another thing I'll be talking to you about is there are positions within a company that are legally liable when the business is not operated in an ethical or legal fashion. And so you do hear periodically of people within companies being sued and going to jail. So that it happens. I won't say it happens a lot, but it usually is in cases where people have been unethical or illegal in their operations.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Okay. So let's talk about how you start a business. And this is a set of slides. There's some questions you need to answer, and I'm going to step through those so you understand how those happen. The first thing is what type of business you want to start. This is a list of various types of companies. I'm not going to go through each one of them. I'm probably going to pick on 2 or 3 that are more common. The sole proprietorship is really somebody who has a small business, local business, servicing local community, and they do not want to treat this as anything other than their own self. And so a sole proprietorship is literally an individual who's set up operations. There's very few protections, actually no protections. If you get sued, you're the one that gets sued, all the things we talked about. How you choose these is very dependent on the type of business, stage of business, and what you are wanting to accomplish. Each of these has different legal and tax implications. A lot of people will go with LLCs and partnerships because from a tax perspective, there's no double taxation. And double taxation means that the company doesn't pay taxes and then the people who own the company have to pay taxes. All the financials flow through to people. So it's a way of saving money. C Corp, S Corp, or specifically the C Corp is a corporation. Oftentimes it's at the stage that you're starting a company as a researcher. A C Corp is used because investors, especially the VCs and professional investors, would like to invest in a company that's a corporation for all sorts of reasons. And I'm actually going to talk a little bit about some of the protections you get or the process you go through when you start up a corporation. But the C Corp itself is a very well-established method for research-derived businesses. And most of the time, when you're a researcher that's starting a business, you're either going to start as an S Corp or jump right to a C Corp, depending on how fast you think you'll grow. The next question you have to answer, oh, by the way, to answer this type of question, a lot of times you can go get legal support. Universities can give you some sort of legal guidance. They have lawyers and stuff that they've found who are willing to donate some of their time. You can go do research online, but ultimately, this is not overly complicated for research-based businesses because there's only 1 or 2 of these that ultimately would be used. The second question you want to ask is, where are you going to start your business? And it's a big world. There's all sorts of reasons you could want to be in one company or another, a country or another. Usually it has to do with where the resources of the company are located, where it plans to do business. In this day and age, people have cross-world businesses very quickly. And so they tend to pick incorporating where they're located as a company. So in your case, it's very likely that you're going to be looking in the United States. Obviously, we're in the Massachusetts area. We'll probably either incorporate either in Massachusetts or Delaware. And how you pick this location, again, is easy advice coming from a lawyer. The ideal situation is when you start a business, you want to be as close to you as possible. And then the second thing is you want it to be as investment friendly as possible. And those two get traded off against each other. Most people actually pick Delaware. And you might wonder, why do people pick Delaware? It's because their law is the most mature. They put in place processes and courts and things that are very streamlined and efficient at dealing with problems associated with companies. So the issue is legal. Potentially, you could have to travel to get there. You'll have to retain a registered agent when you set up your company. So either you'll do a corporation in Massachusetts or in Delaware. If you're on a fast trajectory, you probably go to Delaware because that's a much more investor-friendly location. Just to give you some data, 67% of Fortune 500 companies are incorporated in Delaware. They have 1.5 million corporations. So it's a very high trafficked area when it comes to setting up businesses. All right, any questions? Okay, so here's the typical information you need. It is as simple as going on the web. You could very quickly sign up for a business. You do need to have some information. Name of business. Just sort of funny is people spend a lot of time agonizing over the name of the business. And in the early internet days, everyone was shooting for the domain that said exactly what you did. You can spend way too much time trying to come up with the perfect name. It can be very emotional. My advice is don't over gyrate on it. I have a couple examples here. These are actually on the left, are the names of the businesses that you know today on the right. And you can see that even these big companies, they just need to get started. They need to do the right thing, and then ultimately they'll sort out what their name might be. Another thing you have to answer is the number of founders and how much equity each person gets. That's decided when you set up the business. I will talk a lot more on the next slide or two about equity. You need to have a board of directors. This is the group, and I'll talk more about this as well, that's legally obligated to make sure the business is run ethically. So they can go to jail if the business is not run correctly. Officers of the business are the people who actually run the day-to-day. You need an address. If you're in Delaware, you need a registered agent. They're available online. I think they've got, you can just check box and pick one as you go through the process. And then you have to pick what your fiscal year is. And I know that sounds sort of interesting. We're all of us as individuals file taxes on January 1 through December 31st. Businesses don't have to do that. They can pick when they want the end of their year. And most companies, when they start up, just pick a calendar year. There are reasons why, if you're in specific industries that are cyclical based on time of year, that they may want to pick something different. Retailers, I think, typically pick sometime in Q1 as the end of their year, not end of the year, just as an example. Anyway, any questions so far? So let's talk about equity. This is very top of mind when people start businesses. This is equity, just so you know, is stock. This is the shares of a business. If you own 100% of the business, you're the business is yours, 100%. Nobody else has any part of that business. And if the business does really well, you have 100% of it. If it does really poorly, you have 100% of it. In universities, it's very unlikely that your business is going to start off with 100% for one person, or at least very shortly after it starts off. You're not going to have 100%, even if you're the only person. This is typically in Northeastern how it will work out. And here's why. Northeastern spends a lot of money, millions of dollars a year on IP. And I think it's hard to realize that the investment they're making is significant. And the only payback they get is when they license that tech out to a startup that goes off and does well enough that they get paid some money. It is not a money maker. They lose tremendous amounts of money. Do not begrudge them the fact that they get some of the business when you negotiate the IP. So your business is going to go to Northeastern. It's going to negotiate to get the patents so that you can use those to protect your business. And in return, Northeastern mostly wants equity, but sometimes it gets royalties. Actually, it'll get both. And I'm just throwing out 6%. That's negotiable. All these things are negotiable. I mentioned advisors. Advisors are very important to your business. These are typically people that help build the reputation of your business before it has any reputation. You want to get good people who are willing to associate themselves with your business, and in return, you have no cash. You give them a little bit of equity. And then the founders split the remainder. And I just roughed this out as 90%, plus or minus. How they split it out is actually always an interesting discussion. I do a lot of mentoring at MIT, and I think probably the most controversial part of any of these mentoring efforts is how do you know how much stock each founder should get? And it is actually, to me, a very simple statement. It's the equity at the time the company's formed should be based on the value, the future value that the founders bring to the business. And let me explain what I mean by that. It would be very easy if both founders had exact same skills, brought the exact same amount of money, and committed the exact same amount of time going forward to the success of the business. And you basically say, okay, let's split it even, 45-45. Very rarely that's what happens. What happens is one person comes with different skill sets than another. One of them comes with more ability to impact through their input. If you have if Bill Gates wanted to join your company, immediately him joining brings huge value to your business, and you would consider giving him more equity than you would if someone had no experience whatsoever. If one person is going to spend 100% of their time, and typically more, starting a business, and the other one's only willing to spend 20% of their time, obviously the equity will split towards the person who's willing to spend more time. If someone comes to the table and says, I'm going to give $100,000, and the other person is only giving time, you can see it takes a little bit of discussion to try to sort out exactly how you split out this equity. There's no formula, but those are really the factors you want to consider when you're putting it together. Anybody have questions about that?
Hi there. I have a question actually that's related to the discussion you had about Northeastern spending money on supporting the licensing and the IP. Are there any data on the return on investment they have? I'm just curious, is this like a sort of like losing game that brings sometimes like some benefits, or is this just like it's sure that they always get some sort of return no matter what, no matter how much money they spend in protecting the IP?
Well, so each university is different. And there's only a few universities, Stanford, MIT, that have made more money than they've spent. Just if you look at the whole history, they spent a lot of money. And believe it or not, the vast majority of the money that they've made is based on just a very small percent of the patents that they have issued. So I don't think it's
that something got called Google at some point.
yeah, I mean, some of these drug companies, you know, they can provide a huge amount of royalties or something and offset the cost of the patents. But specifically about Northeastern, they spend a lot of money creating a lot of patents, and they don't have as many licenses and certainly no really big successful licenses that are covering the costs that they're spending. There's other things they get out of it. They have a reputation, you know, the IP is good, it builds reputation. I think there's all sorts of reasons why they have to do this, because they get a lot of research dollars, and along with the research dollars comes a commitment to do the patenting. So it's not something they can walk away from. But I raise this more from the standpoint of a lot of researchers, when they go to negotiate with the TLO, the licensing office or whatever, they are angry from day one that the university is getting any equity because they feel like they've done all the work. But Northeastern and other universities do a lot of work and they spend a lot of money.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions on that? Okay, so this is what happens over time. The pie chart looks crisp, but there's huge variability. This is sort of my estimate of what happens on the average after the first round, big round of an investment dollar into a company that's been founded by a researcher. And so take a look at this. The investors get 50%. This is a high, again, a lot of researchers are upset because they have to give up equity when someone puts in money. But reality is the success rate of businesses in general is low. And so investors invest a lot of money that's lost. We always hear about the big wins. Those are the things that really pop out. But I have never resented the fact that investors get equity in a business, in my businesses, because they are putting out hard, cold cash. It's worth the money at the time they give it to you. And they're putting a lot of faith in the business and the team, and understanding they have a high risk of failure. The other aspect, notice the Northeastern has dropped. They get diluted. That's everyone gets diluted. You start off with a lot of stock and it gets diluted. The hope is that your stock is worth more and more. So even though you got diluted, it's actually worth a lot more. The founders that you see here are down to 15%. That's a pretty big dilution. And we're going to talk about the management team because there's overlap between these different areas. Founders can be management. And if you're a founder and you're management, then you have more equity. There's usually some sort of split between management team and founders, where some of the management team ends up in founders' hands and so forth. And obviously, if the founders all became management, then they'd have access to that whole pool. So this dilution is very much based on decisions that you make about how you want to join or not join the venture when it's created. Any questions about this? Okay, that's equity. And I'm at the end of this presentation, I told you I'm going to come back to the financials. I want to give you some idea of how your roles will result in certain amounts of equity and so forth in the business. I'm going to try to put some a little bit more information behind it based on how you decide to join the venture. Okay, companies. This is a company. I'm going to just make it simple for the purposes of the discussion. I want to talk to you about the structure. It seems complicated with all the different pieces. The other thing I'll tell you is, even though there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 boxes here, and lots of plurals of board of directors and shareholders and so forth. Most businesses do not start off with 20 people. So it could very well be that these roles are shared. It could be one person doing 3 different things. So it really is not as many people as it looks, but the roles themselves are very important to understand. Number one is the shareholders. I mentioned that shareholders are the people who own the company. At the end of the day, it's 100%. And these are the people that ultimately vote to appoint board members. And the only difference from the real world where we all get to go and vote in a democracy is if a shareholder has 50% of the stock, they vote for 50% of the ownership in the business, and essentially can, if they had 51%, everything they vote is what happens. So the owners, it's a very touchy thing as a founder when you lose the ability to vote and control your business. It's just one of those thresholds that you have to be very aware. Anyway, shareholders are owners of the business. The board of directors are the fiduciaries. These are the people who are legally obligated to run the business as a sound business. They monitor the operations. They look at the strategy. They hire and fire the CEO. So the shareholders appoint the board will hire and fire the CEO and are participating in the other officers of the business. But that's really their job. They do not get involved in the day-to-day operations unless they're a bad board. That's not their job. Their job is oversight, steering, direction, and so forth. The president or CEO is the person who's leading the day-to-day operations. This is the person who has to understand strategy. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the president as we go forward, just so you can see just how detailed this gets. But basically, he or she is the one that manages day-to-day operations, hire and fires managers, and he or she may be on the board of directors as well. It's very often, especially in the high-tech arena, that the president CEO is also on the board, and it gives them the direct connection to the board. And then finally, there's the management. There's a lot of functions that it takes to be successful, a lot of managers. These are the major functional areas. As I said, this could be one person, it could be 4 people, and it could be 100 people, depending on the company. So typically as a researcher, when you think about joining a business, you can join in the capacity as a shareholder. You can also join in as a board of director member. You can also join as the president CEO, and you can usually participate as research and product, because that's the technical path within a business. Any question about the organization? Okay. So let's talk about your role. You have a choice of how you participate in a spinout. There's nothing that requires you to do any one thing. You do have to make sure the business has all the right skills to be successful. I know one of the fears is people worry that they're going to lose control. You'd be surprised, especially early on, how much power the researcher has, because there's a lot of work to convert a patent into a real commercial product. And there's nobody better than the researcher to do this. And I have seen a number of businesses at Northeastern that went under because a business spun out the tech and the researcher was not involved. And they were just not able to use the patent to the extent that they needed to. They couldn't get it commercialized, and they went out of business and spent a lot of money going out of business too. So these are the 3 areas that I sort of view you could participate in. And then there's a 5 all the way over on the A. This is you as CEO. If you decide that you want to join the business, you want to be the CEO, you're going to lead it, you can do that. About 5% of the time that a researcher is involved in business, in the business that gets spun out, will they take a lead role? And that's my own number. And this is based on having talked to an awful lot of ventures that have spun out. I'm going to talk about the CEO role specifically very shortly, because it's a very distinctive role. The second one is joining the management team. And about 20% of the time that a researcher gets involved, they will leave their job and they'll go full-time with the venture as part of the management team, usually as CTO or some technical role. And then the third area, C, is the researcher that's going to work part-time within the venture. This happens about 75% of the time that a researcher gets involved with a venture. And the key thing here is they're going to spend less than 20% of their time on the venture. And I think that's a threshold that's set up by the university, that you can work up to 20% on something else without losing your day job. So that 20% is a variable. You could be 5%, it could be 10%, but if you go over 20%, you run the risk that it will no longer be covered by the university and your employment agreements. Any questions about this? Okay. Sorry for the busy slide. There's only a couple. I should probably scale this back a little bit. So in the 5% role where you become the CEO, you will quit your job as a researcher and you will join the business. I put a green line down below using the phases from last time I was presenting. Sometime during proof of concept, you're going to have to switch. And that's because it's a full-time job. Your company will not, you can do it part-time up to a certain point. At the point that you're starting to get people interested in putting money in, you really need a dedicated CEO. And at that point, your responsibility is not research, it's building a team, it's defining direction, putting in place legal, operational, and all these things that are necessary to make sure that the spin-out's successful. You're really switching roles. Completely fine. That I actually encourage it. If there's a strong interest to do that, that you do that, but it has to be done if you meet these criteria. And it's not easy. I'm as a researcher, it's a very different type of job than being a CEO. It doesn't mean you can't do either, or you really can't do both if you're going to do a spin out. So are you a strategic thinker? Are you really good at inspiring people? You know, hiring people, motivating people, directing people, because getting results is all about people. And if you're the type of person that doesn't really like confrontation and you don't want to deal with all the little people issues, then this is not a good role for you in a spin out. You have to know how to focus scarce resources. The two things that are missing in any spin out is time and money. You never have enough time, you never have enough money. And so you have to learn how to be very efficient with both, know how to prioritize and make sure that you set the right direction. At the same time, you never set the right direction the first time. Your opinion of other businesses, especially the successful ones, they took off like rockets and wildly successful, but I can assure you there were multiple major changes in the business as that happened. You have to be willing to do that when it's necessary. So role B. This is the one where you become part of the leadership team, not the CEO. As I mentioned, this is about 20% of the time you are going to leave your job. This is not a part-time. It can start off as part-time, but you will need to quit and join the company full-time in that role if the company is going to be successful. And I say that because investors don't want to invest in businesses that have partial commitment by the people running it. They're really looking for full commitment in order to assure success. You can see that it's later. You can switch later. That just gives you the opportunity to participate, grow with the company a little bit, and decide a little bit later than the CEO on whether you're ready to quit your day job as a researcher and join your day and night job as a part of the team. And then the third role that you could play is in supporting a spinout, and this happens a lot. I mentioned 75% of the time you're assisting the company, you're providing advice, you are doing whatever you have to technically to ensure success of the business. Since you know the technology, you know how to use the patent, you're basically making sure that someone else is coming up to speed on what you know, and when there's critical things that need your contribution, you're contributing. Only the titles, the type of titles that you'll see when you do this will be advisory, technical advisor, it could be a part-time CTO, scientific advisor. Those are all types of part-time positions that you'd have, and you get compensated for it. You're compensated either through stock or you're compensated through money. And of course, if the company doesn't have money, that's not an option. Any questions before I leave the roles? Okay. So what happens next? I'm not going to spend the time. This whole presentation is really about creating a company, but I love this chart. People think this is what success looks like. If you look at Uber, you look at all these different companies, and you think they've just gone from zero to wherever they are today. But the reality is, it's a real mixed path, and your decision to join means you have to be ready to ride these waves. My company, which I grew from 0 to 80 million, and there's the left side, we almost went out of business 3 different times. We were literally one day away once from having to close the doors. So it's a huge ride, and it can be tremendously rewarding. But the real key advice that comes out of this, as a business, as a founder, you need to get good advice, you need to be flexible, and surround yourself with terrific people. Okay. Financial reward. So I think this is the last real area that I'm going to talk through. But I promised I was going to share a little bit about what happens in terms of compensation. So one of the paths is you are researchers who have IP, you have patents that have been created by the university. Whether you get involved or not in the business, that patent is licensed. It'll be licensed to industry, it'll be licensed to a spin out outside the company. You get to share 30% of everything the university collects. So if the university licenses your patent to a spin out that you created, you still will get a cut of the 30%. And the cut I'm telling you about, the 30%, is if there are 3 inventors, they split the royalty and equity that you saw before. There's no other compensation if all that happens is it's licensed. It's possible, because you're the researcher, that the company will come back and pay you money to help them productize it. But that's your value really is coming through the fact that the university is committed to give the inventors a share of everything they got. If you are the CEO and you're the inventor, you still get that IP split. You're now starting to double dip. You're getting royalty and equity from the patent that you licensed to your own company from the university. And also as CEO, you get a salary eventually once you get funding, and you get the largest share of equity. The CEO spends 120% of their time. The CEO is the critical person in the business to make strategic decisions. Everything rises up, and it's all their fault and all their benefit, or their fault in either positive or negative. And so as a result, you're recognized with the largest chunk of equity. And the way that might look like as a researcher is you, when you take a role, the equity is adjusted commensurate with the role that you take. And if you were to join a spinout at the time that the equity split up, you should end up with a larger share than someone who's only going to be working 20% of the time. As a member of the team, you share on the university IP side again. You probably will get a little less salary and you'll get less equity. And you'll spend less time and have less responsibility overall. I'm still very critical. This doesn't mean anyone's contribution to a spinout. All it means is that the expectation and the level of responsibility is just one step down from the CEO. And then in the 20% mode where you're supporting the venture, again, you've got that 30%, you're splitting that 30% share of everything the university makes. You're going to be compensated either through salary or through equity, a much smaller amount of equity. I mean, it's only fair that if you're spending 20% of your time and someone else is spending 100% of theirs doing roughly something similar, they should get a lot more than you. And some people will get both. As a founder, you're going to have some shares. Or if you're not the founder, you'll get, maybe they'll pay you in equity to come and help them as a business for about 20% of the time. And you can also potentially get research dollars. So that's, I wanted to end up on this slide and just basically say, yes, number one, you may fail. A large portion of the ventures fail. But like so many things, it's better to have tried and failed than to never have tried at all. There's a lot of reasons things can fail. And I think something like 73% of people that go on to be CEOs of spinouts from the research arena have had experience in the past, success or not, in having been part of a spinout. So this is where experience makes tremendous difference. I don't know what I'm doing. I can assure you that I've been doing this now for 40 years. I know an awful lot more than what I did. I wouldn't have made many mistakes that I would have made back then. And my best advice about this is when you get to something you don't know, find someone who does. So the university has a tremendous amount of resources. I'm here to help if you have questions. And then there's all the support resources that can help you technically, legally, financially to talk to. It is a lot of work. I'll never talk you out of that. That one is very true. You have to be willing to spend a lot of time because it's directly related to how successful you are. Someone will steal it away from me. I think this is where the education comes in. Some of this concern that people have about having these ideas stolen is simply because they feel they deserve more. And if there's one thing I hope you take away from this presentation is that the reward has to be based on contribution. And you will, when you start a business, lose a lot of the control and a lot of the ownership of the ultimate business, but the ideal is that it's going to be far more successful. And then the last one is you need to quit your day job. The answer is no. There are a lot of ways you can help. There's that 20% role that most people choose and is very critical to success. All right. Let me see if I can jump out here. Questions? Does everybody know everything they needed to know now in order to do a spinout? Okay. Let me ask one last question. I don't have any other training planned. I wanted to see if anybody has any areas that you thought would be really valuable to talk about. Anybody have any thoughts, suggestions on things for the future in this arena?
So thanks, Ted, for the talk. Very interesting. Probably for the something that is just most like might be useful to add somewhere. Different source of fundings and how to approach them, and when it's the right time to approach them. Like determining, oh, that's the right time to go there and ask for money. and how to identify the right set of investors, like not necessarily individual, but their ballpark, and that a specific subset that is kind of like suitable for your idea.
Okay. So let me just make sure I got that. How to select the best investor? That's a really good question. And let me think about that one. And when is right to go after which type of investor? Was that the second question?
Yeah.
Okay. And I will say that my presentation last time on funding was at a very high level, covering exactly when you want to go to what type of investor, depending on what phase you're in overall. Are you thinking that this is more refined in a particular part of the process?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, let me follow up with you to find out specifically what that means. Because I would love to, funding is the most important thing you can get right as a startup. Anybody else? Or if you have anything else, Salvador, thank you. Okay.
Hi, Ted.
Hey, Michael.
This is Mikael. Another area where I think would be interesting, at least for me, is understanding better what to do with patents if you don't go the spin-out way. For example, I didn't know about the 30% thing about the sharing. And I guess there's many more other details that could be interesting to have explained.
That's so you're right. I have not spent a lot of time in either of these two presentations talking about licensing path. Let me do this. The CRI is responsible for all the sort of the marketing and licensing and so forth. I think that's a really good question.
Yeah, we if you remember, we did a session with CRI a few months back, which, to be honest, was not very informative in the sense that they repeated most of it was that presentation was more from a point of view of people that are brand new to the process, don't have patents, and are approaching this for the first time. I think it will be more, at least personally, I don't know about the others, something more hands-on or based on the assumption that you already have patents and you already done disclosure and so on.
Okay. No, I think this could be a really good discussion as to how can you, I mean, because to be honest, the ability to have a patent that has value requires that it has an endpoint in industry. You know, someone's got to want to buy it. Someone's got to want to license it. And I think this is a really good discussion around how do you
get there? How do you get there to that point, right?
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do when the IP is in the process of being created and so forth, that there's some understanding where it could end up. So that's a really good topic. Let me think about that one. I like that as well.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.